Welcome to the sixth in the series of videotapes that we're making about flower arranging. This section is all about spring, and spring of course is daffodil time. So we have the daffodils here, and now of course they come in all sorts of lovely colours. This one's got almost a peachy centre with the outside being white or cream, and then the communal garden yellow ones. Just a quick word about the daffodil though. This is the calyx at the back here, and if you don't get them when they're just pushing out of here, then they have a job once they're in the water to push out, so you might have to release them if you find that that's very sticky in there. My name, by the way, is Barbara Cooper, and I've been a florist for a number of years. This is why we're doing these videos, to help you, the non-florist, to enjoy your flower arranging. So we hope that you'll enjoy this tape and you'll be able to go and get these flowers from your florist or even from your garden. So let's start with doing an arrangement with the daffodils. Before I actually start the arrangement, I want to show you how to wire up daffodils. Now that might sound a bit funny, but what happens is that the head tends to bend, and also if you get the very weak stemmed ones, as they do sometimes come like that, you can't push them into the oasis, they'll splay out at the bottom and they're a bit of a nuisance. So what we, the florists, do is that we cut off the stem, and inside it is hollow. And we take a wire, now this is a green coated wire and it won't rust. You can actually get these stub wires which aren't green coated, but it is worth spending a little extra and getting the green, because then they won't rust in the flower and you can use them again. Just pull them out of the flower when it's dead. This is the stronger of the wires, the thickest gauge, and what we do is you just push it up here until it gets to the end, and you'll feel it stop, and with your fingers you just straighten out the top, push it through the gap which is very narrow just here, and into the actual head of the daffodil. Whoops, missed. When they're very long, they're a bit difficult, that's it. And you'll see it just comes into the centre of the trumpet. That will hold your daffodil, and it'll give you a good push in at the bottom as well. Now, when you buy daffodils from the florist, they usually come in tens, and when you cut them to put them in the water, they give off a sap, because you've opened up the seal at the bottom here, and this is poisonous to other flowers. So you need to put the daffodils, or any of the daffodil family, that is narcissus as well, into a bucket on their own for about 2 or 3 hours. If you can cut them to the length that you actually are going to need them, it's helpful, because obviously otherwise you're going to be recutting them and letting the sap out again. That's why you quite often see daffodils just put into vases on their own. So when you cut them, put them into a bucket on their own, but once they've stopped the dripping, they'll be fine to use with other things, like the tulips. Right, to start off with, we're now going to get the oasis and start the arrangement. To arrange them, we're going to need oasis or the foam block. This is a dry block ready for soaking, and you can see it's pale green. When they're fully soaked, they're heavy and they're dark green, and they should be dark green all the way through. And you'll soon tell, because when you put it in a bowl of water, it will just sink below the level of the surface of the water when it's actually fully soaked. And that's very important, because in your warm house, the flowers will sup up the water very quickly, and you'll need to keep this watered every night if you can remember. The other things you're going to need is a dish or a container to do your arrangement in. These are commercial dishes. This is a fairly deep dish, which is good for holding the water if you've got a lot of flowers. This is more of a table arrangement centre dish. And if you haven't got any of these dishes, then you can just use an ordinary saucer. You'll need a nice sharp knife. I usually use my carving knife because then I can't lose it. And you'll need to cut the oasis about 1 inch to 1.5 inches above the height of the container that you're going to be using. Excuse me while I just push this over here. And sometimes they leak water out when you go to cut them. So nice straight cut down. And that just pushes into your dish like that. Now, some of the dishes have got little frogs at the bottom like that to hold the oasis in, but usually we put a piece of tape around just to make sure that the oasis doesn't fall out of the container. If you bring it right round on both sides and meet in the middle at the bottom, then you know that it can't unravel. Sometimes if the dish is damp, it doesn't stick properly. If you don't have the tape, then the other alternative is the dish with what we call a frog. It's a bit like an upside down table, and for that you also need to stick it in a fixer. This is a bit like a piece of glue, and it's quite sticky. It's a bit like plasticine, but it actually sticks quite well. And you cut a piece the set size of the bottom of your frog. Make sure the dish is dry and press it into the centre like that, and it will stick really well. Pressing it right in, and then you can put your foam straight onto the top of that, and if you want to, you could always put a piece of tape over or an elastic band. To start off with, I'm going to do an arrangement with daffodils and freesias, because freesias are a flower that comes into the florist shops all the year round, and you can always get the nice colours. This is called Fantasy. It's cream, and it has a lovely smell. You can get this in a double variety as well, but for Easter and for the springtime, these colours are nice, and they give you a nice smell along with your daffodils. And most people have daffodils in the gardens, so of course you don't need to go and buy those, although at the moment they're very cheap. Right, let's clear this away from here. Usually we start off by putting our foliage in first, because that gives us the background and the shape that we're going to need. Let me just clear these off here. Bring these forward. We have bear grass. If you haven't got bear grass, you could use rushes, but the bear grass is a family from the pampas, and it's very sharp if you run your hands over it. If you bring them back the wrong way, you get a nasty razor cut, so do be careful with it. But it's quite a nice leaf to use for a different type of shape, but you will need to wire these up, because otherwise you'll have to put them in singly, which is a bit of a bore if you're in a hurry. This is the smaller of the green wires, and I put 3 on there, and you can see they're green coated as well, and they won't rust in the oasis. So what we do is we get them into a little bunch together so all the bottoms are level, and we take our wire and we use it like a hairpin, taking the longer of the 2 ends round, gathering the ends together like that, so they're really just tied, and then these will push nicely and stay into the oasis properly. Cut it off a bit shorter. Right, this is a fern and it's called leatherleaf. It actually comes from Panama, but if you happen to live in Cornwall, then you'll have a fern very similar to that growing in your hedgerows. It's a nice, easy leaf to use because you can cut off some of the fronds and use those later on when you want a shorter piece. I'm going to do a front-facing arrangement, so I'm working back to front so you can see what I'm going to be doing. You want your back marker at the back of the oasis, leaving a nice amount at the front for you to put your flowers into. That's the point, and then you want 2 coming out on either side. The idea being that it covers up the dish. On either side like that. This is arrangement we'll probably do for a sideboard or the front of an altar, because you're not going to see the back, so you don't need any flowers at the back. If you've got people walking around the back, then you'll need to fill in this section at the back with some greenery so they can't see your mechanics at the back here. Then you go around the front with the bits that you've cut off your longer fronds and cover in the dish, a bit like a frill at the front. And then this section in here. This gives you your background shape. I'm going to use mostly things that you can get from a florist in this one, because not all of you might have gardens that have got good foliage in, so this you can go and buy without any problem at all. We can add a nice piece of bare grass at the top, because it's nice and thin and you want your smaller, thinner pieces at the top. We have some lilac. Now lilac is funny because as a florist we sell lilac and we don't worry about it, we keep it in the shop. Now some people have a phobia about it and they say it's bad luck to bring it in the house, but we sell it as a cut flower, so we consider it okay. And because it's tall and thin, it goes at the back as your back point. You want to cut it in between these joints here, because these are your buds and they don't take up the water very well where there's a joint here. It's a bit like a knot in a piece of wood in your furniture. It won't take the water up very well. And also when you get it, you need to bang it with a hammer or cut it at an angle and then make a split up it, because it needs to take up a lot of water. And to enable it to do that, you have to make it open at the bottom and let all the air out so it can take the water up. We usually put quite hot water with this, and also we use a crystal, which is a plant food, or flower food rather. We dissolve it in the water. If you haven't got that, then you could use sugar dissolved, a couple of teaspoonfuls of sugar dissolved, or even an aspirin, which is the old-fashioned remedy for picking up flowers. If it droops, then you need to cut it a lot shorter, and then it tends to come up beautifully. But it's got a nice smell and it will go beautifully with the freesias. As you can see, this one's got a bit droopy here, and what's happened is that it's rotted at the junction here. These actually come from Holland, so they've obviously been knocked in the journey, and it's more or less cut in half there, and I didn't notice it when I cut the bottoms. But the green part here, where it's not been mouldy, if you cut that off there and you pop that in an egg cup or a small glass of water and you leave it for a couple of hours, then it'll be nice and stiff again, and you can use it in a shorter place in the middle of another arrangement perhaps. I always think it's very difficult to know when winter finishes and when spring starts, because certainly the weather at the moment isn't making it very summery or spring-like at all, with loads of snow, and it does not helping the flowers outside at all to be able to keep their nice colours. And this is what's happened to the forsythia. It's caught the wind, and because we're in Yorkshire and it's been very snowy and wet and windy recently, all the forsythias caught the wind on the wind side. This side is not too bad, so I don't think you'll actually see it, but it has what we call a wind burn, which is a brown mark on the petal. But you can buy this from the florist. It usually comes from Holland, and it's nice straight pieces, and you shouldn't have any problems. They shouldn't be marked. But you can cut these in between and use the shorter bits for the front and the sides, and the taller bits at the back. Blossom is lovely because it makes a nice infill, and you don't need so many flowers. Don't put too much in, because the thing with the daffodils, because they have a hollow stem, they also take up a lot of room in the oasis, so you need to get those in fairly speedily. Let's find a nice buddy one, just about the right height before I start. Push my wire up, right up to the top, through it at the top, and I have a little bit extra, so I cut that off. Push that in. Have another one that's nearly open. Oops, missed. Up to the top. If you put your finger there and just straighten the head as the wire gets to here, you'll find it, because it'll stop, and you just push that straight with these two fingers and hold it while you just go through. Those that are nurses will know exactly what to do for this. And then it straightens it up. You don't have to do all of them. If it's a nice stiff stem and you can push it in, fair enough, but sometimes they're very weak at the stem, and that is what you'll need to do. The thing about daffodils is that they come in all sorts of colours and almost all kinds of shapes now. Some have got long trumpets and some have got very short trumpets, like the old-fashioned pheasant eye, which hardly has a trumpet at all. And we tend to get these in really from the end of November. So for us, spring starts at the end of November, goes right through until the last of the daffodils come from Scotland, where it's the coldest and they're the last to open. The first ones come from the Scilly Isles, and as I said, they start coming through about the end of November time, and they're usually the Sol d'Or or the paper white narcissus, which have lovely smells. And the Scilly Isles are very famous for their beautiful narcissus. We get tulips too around the same time, but they come from Holland. And if you get them too early in the year, then they tend to be a bit floppy on the head because they're so forced. But now the tulips are out in the gardens, and if you're down south, then they'll have been out a lot earlier. Ours aren't quite out in the garden here yet. But in the florist shops, of course, you can get all sorts of different colours. And there's a beautiful double one called Angelique, which is a pink with almost a greeny hint in it, and it's really beautiful. The double ones last a nice long time, but they are quite expensive. Let's see how we're going with that. One off a bit short. Push it in there. Right, the freesias, which usually come from Holland or from the Channel Islands, Guernsey or Jersey, are usually sold in 5s. If they're Dutch, they tend to come in, certainly into the florists, in 10s, and we have to split them down into 5s because they're quite expensive, and most people really only want to buy 5 at a time. But they're nice and tall, and they're thin stems, so they slot in easily. Try not to get the flowers on the same level. We try to make them at alternate levels and depths. So you want your darker or biggest flowers in the centre and your smallest buds or your lighter coloured things to the edges. Unless you're making a line, which of course goes as a line through the arrangement. I'm trying to find a hole there where I've blocked it with the lilac. So So you want to come to your edges of your greenery, because that's your triangle shape. Like that. With the freesias, of course, you can pick off your flower heads as they die off. So when that one goes, if you pick it off and then the others come along on the stem then. If you leave it till it really dies off, then the whole stem finishes and they won't come on out. If you keep these little tiny buds long enough, then quite often they will come out as well. But you have to wait for several weeks, and they're worth just putting into an egg cup or something, just to keep them in the kitchen for a bit of smell when they finally open up. As you see, I'm working back to front, so I have a bit of a problem with my bit in the middle here, because I can't see too well upside down. Push this one at the front here. Right. My bits of bare grass are falling off here. There are all sorts of lovely blossoms when the snow has left them alone. At the moment, unfortunately, up here, being in Yorkshire, we're a bit far north and they haven't actually come out yet. But down south, they're out and they're nearly over. When I went down the other day to Hertfordshire, nearly all the blossom had been blown off the trees. Right, you're coming in nearly finished. Right, the bare grass you can actually cut down once you've started. When you've got them in, you can cut these bits back a bit if they're too long. So let's make another bunch. I'm using a slightly stiffer wire here because now I've got all these things into the oasis here, I have to be able to push it through a bit more like that. Just a little bit at the front here. Depends how dangly out you like these pieces. I mean, the modern thing now is to have these pieces dangling out, and you'll see them in all sorts of wedding bouquets and things like that. But as I said, do be careful. If you've got young children and they're likely to touch anything, please keep these out of range of them, otherwise you're going to have cut fingers and children that are a bit upset. These are Singapore orchids. These come usually as a white colour, but these have been dyed this nice sort of lemony yellow, and they come all the year round, which is why I'm using them now. And we usually use them in wedding bouquets, but because they have a nice drooping out appearance, we can pop them in here as well. They come in threes, or certainly the dyed ones usually come in threes. If you're buying a white one, you can sometimes get the very big ones in a single with a little test tube at the bottom, which is useful because you can keep the test tube and use it to put your rose in when you get it at Valentine's Days. Keeps your rose nice and fresh with a little drop of water. And if you're lucky, you might find that it actually comes with 2 leaves, the Sharon fern, which you can just pop in as an extra bit of greenery, and another type of focus line there like that. Okay, now this is a good colour for Easter, Easter being yellow and white, and if you wanted to, You could take that along to your church altar, and where they usually have those little roundy brass vases, you can pop that on the top of it and it becomes a pedestal arrangement, which is quite handy. Or you could perhaps put, say, a couple of rabbits like that in front and make it into an Easter arrangement for the children. Or perhaps an Easter egg would be quite pretty, popped in here for the children to pick up on Easter morning. Clear this all off now, just to try and give you some ideas of bits that you could put. Oh, I know. How about using some of your china? Take the rabbits away. And you could pop into your centre point there your Maltese cockerel, the harbinger of spring, along with his daffodils. For something nice and easy, I thought we'd do this little horseshoe. It's usually used to put primroses in, and it's very nice because you don't have to use oasis or anything to keep them in there. The idea being that you cut the flowers off short and you just pop them in the dish with the water in it so that they stand out like that. This is Laurustina, and it's very useful if you want to put something in the garden, if you've got a garden. This is a very good shrub to put in. It flowers at this time of the year in the early spring, and it has a lovely whitey pink flower, and you can buy it from the florist if you haven't got any locally. It's quite cheap as well. So you can just lay that into there with a bit of its leaf. Then we have some forget-me-nots, because they're just putting their heads out of the snow. Like that. Just pop them in. You don't have to worry about trying to get the things to stay. They should just wedge beautifully. This is a nice little purple primrose. I've always called them a wanda, but I don't know that it's what its proper name is. But they're nice and bright, and the birds haven't attacked these. You'll find the birds always tend to go for the yellow colours, especially the crocuses, and pick out the centres, so you get left with nothing on your bush of either primroses or crocuses. In the florists also at this time of year you'll find the anemones coming in all different colours, and they're really pretty, but you do tend to find that they get a bit rotten on the heads. These have come up from Cornwall, which is one of the main senders of anemones, and you can see that they're quite marked where they've been out in the fields. The other place they come from is Italy, and again, because of the journey, they tend to get quite squashed on the head, and you might find some of them aren't very good. So the idea, which is useful, is that when you buy them, if you take them home and run them under some cold water, the heads under some cold water, give them a good shake, it freshens them up and brings out the colour. It also helps to give this bit of leaf at the top here some water so that it drinks it up and makes it a bit stiffer. So if the white ones tend to get very badly marked in the transit, so they're no good for a start. But the pink ones and the red ones seem to be very good and stiff usually. I went to Turkey a couple of years ago in March, and I was absolutely amazed to find all their verges covered in the red anemones growing like weeds out there. They were really pretty. The other things now out are all the year-round pansies. The winter flowering pansies are out now. This is the nice white with the purple centre. The trouble with pansies is that they've always got fairly short stems, so they're not really very good for putting into arrangements as a rule. But for this kind of arrangement, you can actually keep the faces pushing upwards so you can see their pretty little eyes and things. These have got a bit bashed around in the snow that we've had recently. So if you just pop your anemones and some little grape hyacinths, oops, into there like that. you try and keep them sort of fairly generalised in a group, so you've got your grape hyacinths around that anemone there. Another bit of laurustina to keep it in. Bit of greenery. Forget-me-not. This is very useful for sort of things that have got broken heads. You know, if you've got a very short daffodil that's been beaten down in the garden, and you've got some other little bits to add to it, then this would be a good dish to use. They're fairly old-fashioned, maybe even Victorian idea, but for modern-day flower arranging, it's nice and quick. And if you've got visitors coming you didn't expect, it doesn't take too many bits to pop round. Of course, this time of the year, being round Easter, is also palm being out, the pussy willow. This you'll find in all the hedgerows, and you can actually get it from florists as well sometimes. Certainly in London they have it. These are the pollen stamens on here, so you might have to watch if you've left them in here a couple of days that the pollen hasn't spread onto your tablecloth. You can actually plant these twigs if you have a space in the garden that's a nice long distance away from your house. You could push these into the ground at the bottom here where a knot is, or a joint node, and that will probably grow quite well. Just make sure that you're not near any water drains or near your house sewage or water systems, because these put out very fibrous roots which go a very long distance underground, and then as soon as they find a water system or a pipe of any sort, all the roots scoot down it and clog it up. So definitely a plant for keeping out of reach of your house if you can. You can buy heather in pots, either from the nursery or from your florist. Sometimes you get it pink at this time of year, or sometimes the white. The white is certainly out in the gardens at the moment. There are different varieties of heathers that come out at different times of the year. It's always thought of as being very lucky. And if you're Scottish, then I'm sure you'll have a heather plant somewhere around. There we go. Now it's nice and quick, and the thing with this is not having any of the foam in here. The flowers last a nice long time as well, because they can take the water up directly without having to try and fish it through the foam. We're going to do a tied bunch. Now, this is the in thing at the moment on the continent. They wouldn't dream of giving anything in cellophane nowadays. They give it to them already tied up with a bow at the end, which is supposed to drop straight into a container of some sort, which is all right if you've got a container that will take the stems when they've all been tied together. But over here, we don't always have that kind of container at hand. So it makes it more difficult, and a lot of people just undo it, not realising that they're supposed to keep them already tied up. The idea being that these stems go round in a spiral, and you can just plonk them in and they stand up on their own. I've always found it a particularly difficult thing to do, and it's not my favourite thing, but I will give it a go. Start off with, you have to take off surplus leaves from the bottoms of your flowers. This stops, because you're going to have this bit in the water, it stops this bit going off once you've got it in your container. We want the thing for the middle, either a piece of blossom or a tulip, this is a white tulip, so it's nice and light for your centre point, which you hold together. Then you will need some mossing string or some very good quality wool that won't break if you haven't got any mossing string. And we're going to start by twisting it round at the bottom of the stems. I'm just going to drop this on the floor because I can pull it then as I need it, so that it's started off, it's not knotted, but it's just started off properly, like that. You can leave a bit at the end if you like, because you're going to need to tie it off, if you can find it when you've finished it. And we start putting the flowers in, stripping off the leaves at an angle. We've got to keep turning this as we're going so that the things fit in always at an angle. And you'll eventually end up with a spiral of flowers as you go. You twist the string around at the same time, slotting each one on as you go. Once you've got the first bit done and you've got a piece to start working with, then slot some foliage in as you go. Also makes it a bit thicker for the flowers to stip onto. So we're going round like this. Next one on. Spiralling round and binding as you go. We're using irises because they're nice and tall. They don't have a lot of stem with leaves on it to have to dispose of, and they're nice and spring-like as well. A bit of lilac. Keep turning it round. Slotting in each one on top of the next, so you're going round nicely. A couple of pink tulips. Whoops. Have to be careful you don't get yourself hooked up as you go round on the bottoms of the stems. If you do get too long, then cut them off a bit so you've got a bit of a working area then. Not too short, because you're going to need to splay it out at the end. And if you can put them in as you're going round like that, so you can see you're getting a pattern as well. I've got a bit of blossom on this side, so I don't want it till I've turned around and got to the other side. No, it's too dark. A bit of lilac in there. On again, twist. Tulips also droop a lot. They tend to grow at quite a phenomenal rate at night, and they bend towards the light, so you'll find that they'll droop down nicely on the outsides of these. The idea being that sometimes if you don't want them to droop or to bend over, is that you prick the heads with a pin. Now sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. If you actually buy them and they're very droopy, and if you get some wet newspaper, damp newspaper, and you roll your tulips up very tightly, it'll keep them up nice and straight, it'll straighten them out, and it'll also help to revive them as well. And you see it's going round in a circle, and the stems are coming in a spiral as well. Keep it nice and tight, otherwise it'll undo itself and you'll end up with a piece that's dropped off. If you find you're pulling too hard, it might crack the stems, so you'll have to make sure you bind them in with a bit of foliage to help them with a bit of support. Irises, unfortunately, don't last too long. Their actual recommended time for indoors in a hot climate is 2 to 3 days at the most. So don't expect these to last too long. The tulips, if you keep them cool at night, can last up to a week. can wiggle a bit in at the sides if you find that it's necessary. It gets quite heavy, so your wrist starts to ache if you're not careful. Whoops, that's turned round, that should be like that. Pull that tight. You should end up with a circular arrangement with a foliage frill round the outside. I have to do this up fairly high, otherwise it catches on the table underneath me. I always think these are fairly expensive to do because you need quite a lot of flowers, and I'm not sure that they look particularly brilliant when they're done. But the modern trend is this way, and this is what you're expected to be able to do. Put 2 or 3 together at the side there. I've used blue and white with only a hint of pink because I'm going to put it in a blue bowl when I've finished. Right, put this down for a minute because I just want to pick some bear grass up. Don't forget, this is a bit prickly. Just want to bind this in as I go round. A couple of lots. Ouch. You can wiggle this in between the flowers like that. Right. Final twist. It's getting quite heavy for my hand now. Oops. Put the foliage in. And what we're going to do next is to put it into a piece of cellophane to show that you can give it as an arrangement. Right, I'll just cast this off. Now, if you're clever and you've left a nice long piece of string at the beginning, you can tie it off with that, or what I generally do is to wind it through the stems, pulling it up a couple of times so it's nice and stiff, caught into here. Backwards and forwards so that it's hooked up well, and then I can cut it off and tie it off with a loop behind one of the back branches. If you tied it up tight, it shouldn't unravel, or you can use your teeth to pull it tight, or if you've got a friend who's there, she can put her finger on the knot for you. So I've just done a knot on this side. Right, then the idea is that you cut these off in the spiral. Now, as I said before, I'm not particularly brilliant at doing these, but as we're not supposed to be working for florists, and I'm only trying to do it for you to give you an idea of what you can do. Put all that on the bottom. Have to bang it down a couple of times so that it, the idea being that it actually stands upright. Right, you can bend these bits through to wherever you want to go. Now, the next idea is that you should be able to put it in cellophane with a bow at the front for your giving of to friends and relatives. So what you need to do is to get some cellophane, and take a big square because you're going to fold it up around the arrangement. And it should run up. If you've got a decent pair of scissors, it'll run up there like material. Right, now the thing with cellophane is that it tends to be fairly static and it picks up just about everything dust-wise that you've got floating around on your surface. That's better. Right, now to make it more complicated, we're going to need to tie it with a ribbon. So I'm going to show you how to use ribbon. This is a nice bright yellow because it shows up well for you, and also it's a nice colour for using with your daffodils, etc. It's a stripping ribbon, which means that we can make it any width we want, and it's also very good for using in water. It doesn't take any offence to being wet. So we need one piece to start off with, which is the tie bit to go round. So take one piece off about 1 metre. And then we're going to make several bows. So this goes across and gets pinched in. This one comes this way and gets caught by the 2 fingers on the other side. This is going to be 4, so we need another one on this side and another one coming in behind to give you your bow shape. Cut this off because we're going to use those later. Take your original long one and split it so that it's not too wide, and you catch the centre of this bow and tie it at the back. We're not using wires on this, but in case you haven't actually got any, this you can use with just your fingers and your ribbons. So you'll end up with your bow tied like that. And you can go on, you can make 2 or 3 more loops if you want a fuller one. That's up to you. And then you can make some streamers which you can tie to the centre of your bow to come out when you've finished it with the cellophane. The nice thing about this ribbon is it'll strip, and the stripping bits you can curl. If you curl it one way, it goes nice and tight. If you pull it on the other side, it'll straighten out again. So if you over curl or under curl, you can correct it. That way to curl, and on the top or the opposite side to make it straight again. So these we're going to tie around our centre bit so that it's facing towards the front. Not in the middle. And these we're going to pull. Makes a lovely noise. It sounds like nails on a blackboard. Ooh. If you've got a very soft ribbon, sometimes it's very difficult to make this curl nice and tightly. Right, so you take your cellophane and you put your arrangement into the middle, roughly, and you take up the 4 corners round, like that, pulling it in all the way round. When you've got it nicely centred and all your points upwards, you put your ribbon, the 2 that you haven't stripped, the original 2 you tied it with, you take and tie it around whichever side you've decided is the back of the arrangement. pull it nice and tight, because what you're going to do next is to fill it with water. And you can either cut them off or just make those into a streamer as well. Right, so I've taken the ones that we hadn't stripped, the first tying ribbon that we tied the bow together with. I brought it round the back, whichever side you decided is the back, and I've tied it off in a knot, and I've just streamered it so that it looks pretty at the back as well. So what we end up with, if I raise it up, is an arrangement with a bow on at the front and your bear grass, etc. like that. And it should stand up on its own, it says, hopefully. Right, so what we also do now is that we take some water, if you've got a milk bottle, and you just pour into here some water. Now, I haven't got a milk bottle, but the idea being that you fill this up 3/4 up here so that the flowers actually are in a vase. So you don't need a vase with this. Your flowers and your cellophane are acting as one. And this is what you'll happen to get quite often given to you if you're going to hospital. So don't, for goodness sake, take the cellophane off, otherwise you're going to get a wet bed. You do need to keep these things sprayed, especially ferns, etc., because they dry out so quickly in the hot atmosphere of your house. So whenever you get a chance, give the things a good spray, certainly at night before you close up and you turn your heating off. Now, if you didn't want to put your cellophane on and you're not going to give it as a present like that, you could just keep your original base like that, straighten it out so that it's where you want it, and you can take a bowl and just drop it straight into there. Obviously you'll have your bowl filled with water and your arrangement is tied and all ready to put on your sideboard. You can make it to fit. If it's too high, then just gently tease the outside ones down like that. Ta-da! Not actually falling over. That can't be bad for me. Don't forget to give it a good spray. And don't forget to fill the glass up with water either. Baskets arrangement are probably the easiest ones for you to do because you already have the base of the container already covered, so to speak. And you can get all sorts of different kinds. This one doesn't have a liner as this one does, so you'll have to put a dish into here, either your saucer or, don't forget, your piece of fix onto which your dish will push so it won't fall out. And then you'll need another piece of fix for your frog for the middle of your dish. That's the pale variety, and then of course you've got your nice dark wickerwork or the fairly large flat one. This one's already got its dish attached earlier on and a bow. I'm going to show you how to put the bow on in a minute. I'm going to do this one here with the base in here. You want to just make sure before you start that there aren't any holes, because these are sewn in, usually in Taiwan or wherever the baskets are made, and sometimes they get little marks, prick marks where the baskets come through, and then you go and put your water in it and it all comes out onto your table, and then people aren't very pleased. Right, another piece of fix for my frog. Put it in the bottom and pop my frog on the top. So I'm ready to start like that. My oasis is here. I don't need as big a block as this. I'll just cut a piece off the end here. The knife away. Right. Push this down onto my frog like that. Now if you wanted to make certain of it not falling out, then you could push a wire through here. I mean, if you're not going to move it a lot once you've arranged it, then there's not much point in putting a wire through. But if you're going to take it to somebody and you're going to have to go on a train or something like that, then it's maybe better to just pop a wire through the middle of it and loop it round each handle at either side, keeping it at the bottom. Or if you wanted to, you could just push it through a hole like that in the wickwork and bend it back and twist it over. That way you can be sure that it's not going to fall out. We just clear these off here. A bit more space. Right, for the basket, obviously we need the foliage, and this is the leather leaf again, which you can cut down like that. I'm going to make it come out on either side with the handle in the middle. If you wanted to, you could have an arrangement a bit higher on this side and coming out through there. It just depends what kind of shape you fancy or where you've got to put it even. Take off any bits that are broken. I want to make sure they're roughly even. I'm a bit further on that side than on this side, so I'm just going to pull this one out and take one section off, like that. Again, you've noticed that I have the Oasis about an inch, inch and a half above the height of the container. This means that I can push up into it and the things can trail over the edge. If you have it dead level, then it's jolly difficult because everything you put into it has to be pushed upright. So in order to get it to trail, put your Oasis a bit higher. And this goes for any kind of arranging that you're doing, whether it's a pedestal arrangement or whether it's this type of basket. To make a change in foliage, I'm trying to keep to things that you can get from your florist at the moment. This is Leylandii, and if you can't get it from your florist, then it's one of the most common bushes around, really. Most people try and cut this in the spring anyway, and so you'll find people hedge cutting down your road, I'm quite sure, and they'll be jolly glad to get rid of their bits of foliage on you. It's also good because it lasts a very long time and it doesn't need too much water or looking after. If you've got one of these bushes in the garden, you'll find that it grows at a rate of knots, and it's very good for it to be cut back a bit, otherwise it gets right out of reach and you can't keep track of it. It also blocks the light out for your other flowers as well. If you can see what I'm doing, I'm actually cutting in between the branch like that, so I get 2 or 3 bits from one. I'm not wasting any of it. As long as I've got a fairly stiff piece to push into the Oasis, it's a bit like aiming a dart. Push it in with a good swift straight push. Like that. Whoops. As we said before, the heather's nice, and you can buy your heather plants from your nursery or from your florist, and the good thing about that is that you'll have a plant afterwards to put in the garden. They're quite slow growing, so if you're going to put it out there, then you have to sort of be a bit good where you take off the branches when you're going to use it for flower arranging, because it takes several years for it to get any size, and it's not going to help it if you're going to keep hacking at it. Right, I made a line through the middle here as a sort of focus line with that. I'm just going to put some edges in with his wax flower, and this is the pink variety. You can get it in the pink or the darky mauve colour, or even a white one. I always think the white's a bit anemic. It's very aromatic. If you make the leaves give up their scent, it's a very nice aromatic-y scent, and it comes from Israel. But it does tend to shed its little bits off. This one's quite good and it's not shedding, but quite often these little waxy bits will fall off. It's not one of the very good things for drying. I've tried drying this, but they're just little bally bits just fall off and it's not much good at all. But it makes a nice edge to your arrangement. If you haven't got this, then use prunus or almond when it comes out. Unfortunately, we haven't got any up here because it's too cold for it as yet. And I haven't been down south to be able to pick any up. I don't think much of it will have survived these high winds that we've been having recently anyway. Looks like confetti all over the paths and on the garden. I'm doing this all round, although it's slightly boat-shaped. Right, nothing much left on that. I'm just going to put a few irises in. They're quite a large flower, so you don't want too many of them because they're a bit dominating. Also, if you notice, this one's just beginning to go here at the neck. Sometimes you'll find that there's a mark here and it goes right the way through into the main stem and then the head just drops off. So if you can catch that before it gets right the way through, just pull it off so that the new stem underneath isn't contaminated. With most flower arrangements, we tend to use 3s or 5s or 7s. They're always an odd number for flowers. And it's quite nice sometimes to group flowers so that you've got the colours on one side and a different colour on the other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, so let's stop there for the moment. I have been out into the garden and I've picked these. These are Candelabra primulas, part of the Polyanthus type family, and they're very good for multiplying in your garden. Once you get a clump, you can divide that and then redivide it every so many years, and you get quite a nice amount of plants all around the garden. And they last quite a long time, especially in a good arrangement. They'll last 2 or 3 weeks because you can pick off these heads as they die off. Put them at different levels. Don't keep things on one level, and the biggest and the most open go right towards the centre. Because this is going to be seen all the way around, I'm just going to pop these at the back here. Don't forget the back, because if somebody's coming round to look on your table from behind, they'll find a big gap if you're not filled in around here. These are the leaves that came with the Singapore orchids. Just pop those in there like that. And as you can see, the tulips are beginning to open. So take those off there. Now, if they are the right type, you can pull these petals back by gently rubbing your finger on the back and pulling them back with your finger and thumb like that. These are going to be quite good ones actually. Like that. You do the outside ones first and the 3 inside ones afterwards in a circle. Now, who would think that's a tulip? And they last just as long like that. They don't actually die off because you pull the petals back, but it makes it look like a lily. And you can pull your leaves back in the same way. It's quite a good talking point because people will come in and say, oh, that's an unusual flower, whatever is it? Not realising, of course, that it's the old communal garden tulip. So just pull it back gently so you don't split it. Now it's not all the tulips that will do this. Some of them refuse point blank to be pulled open like that. And of course, as they grow, as they will do, they'll bend into a shape anyway. All the old masterpieces that you see in the old oil paintings of the Dutch masters have tulips that are drooping all over the place, over the sides of their vases, and nobody is bothered about them at all. They like them to droop over. But nowadays we get really upset if our flowers tank off on their own and leave where they're supposed to be. Of course, you don't have to do that. You can just leave one or two as they should be. But don't forget that will bend about a bit after a couple of days. Don't forget the leaves, because they're just as useful. And if you haven't got many flowers and you need an infiller, don't forget the tulips on their leaves. And you can bend them back like that. And if you take a wire, a thin wire, you can catch them, the tip to the stem, like that. And make, it's got a mark there, but you can make a bow with your leaf if you wanted to make it as a different type of shape. Sometimes they'll stay, but they won't stay for long unless you've wired them. Oops. Let's wire this one again. Bend it over and just catch the back of the leaf like that. Cut the wire off because you don't actually need the wire for the stem. You can do the same with daffodil leaves as well. You can make bows of daffodil leaves. That's nearly finished, but if you want to make a bow to go on the end of that, I picked the burgundy because it goes with all those shades of colour. We can do 2 or 3 different types. This is going to be a bow for putting into the arrangement, so you don't want to leave any trails on it, so you bow it together like that. Instead of coming on this side, you're going to go back on the same side and together again. Cut it off and you have 3 loops. And then you pick up your wire and you hold it between these fingers, still holding the bow together like that, and you take the wire across the tops of your fingers, which also winds it round the bottom of the ribbon like that, so you end up with your bow on a wire. I'll just show you again. You loop and squeeze, you loop and squeeze, and you loop and squeeze. If you've got too much, you can always cut that bit off, like that. I always twist mine again, I don't know why, but I re-hold it like that. Put your wires between your fingers, your thumb and the bit that's holding the ribbon, and take the long bit around a couple of times like that to hold it. This is a green tape. It's slightly stretchy. It's not actually sticky, but it sticks on itself when you hold it together with the warmth of your fingers. We call it guttural or pot tape or Stemtex. And what we're going to do is we're going to cover this bit here because it doesn't look very nice. So you hold the ribbon so that it's away from you, and with your fingers you start it off holding it between this finger and this thumb, and these 2, finger and thumb, pull it slightly. So you twist with these 2 like that, and you take the tape on itself but pulling down slightly as you go so that it stretches it and it sticks itself on each turn. Then you can just pull it off like that at the end so that you have the wire covered. It also stops it from going rusty if you haven't got the green wires as well. I'll just do this one again. Started off by holding it with these fingers, twisting with whichever hand you've got that's free, down along the wire, pulling this way gently with these fingers as it goes along on the wire. And you should be able to go all the way down the wire like that if you need to. Like that. Oh, there's a bit at the top. Just go over it again if it comes undone. But it's very sticky. Once it's done like that, it won't unravel, and it's quite a job to get off. So these ones we can now use, whoops, in the centre of here if you want to, like that. Like that. And if you want to use one to come out at the front, we take a length, it doesn't matter what length, as long as it's about a foot, I suppose. I usually do it from my fingers to sort of my armpit. And you can strip it. Now some ribbons strip beautifully and some go off on their own tangent, and it's really annoying. So for those ones I usually start in the middle by just pressing it between my two fingernails. Luckily my fingernails are quite long, so it's quite easy for me. I can just pull it both ways like that. So what we do is we take them all together, the bits, and put them together at the top. And we take our wire, and holding them together, we pull the wire back like a hairpin, take the longer bit and wrap it around like that several times. I have to turn it round like that because I can't twist otherwise. Take your tape, your stem tape, and then you just twist it on to cover the top. And then you take your scissors and your thumb, and between them you pull the ribbon through. Like that. Okay? Sometimes you get a bit at the end that hasn't curled properly like that, so you just have to hold it and do the ends on their own. Whoops. Don't forget you can unravel it by drawing it along on the opposing face. Right, and that one can just sit coming out like a waterfall at the front of your arrangement. Now if you wanted to do, this would be too much for this arrangement, but if you actually wanted to do one onto your basket handle, what you could do is again take your ribbon, you'll want a tying one, so take a thin one for your tying, and another couple for your streamer bits. Right, and we do as we did before, leave a little bit at the end here, which you could strip later on if you want to. Take a bow, hold it, a bow on the other side, hold it, one on this side and hold it, and that's your fourth one. Okay, like that. Take one of your thinner ones, wrap it round, pull it tight and tie it off at the back, trying not to drop it all as you do it. It's quite easy to drop the whole lot when you get to this stage. Funny enough, bows are one of the most awkward things to do for people that haven't actually done floristry, because you're all fingers and thumbs, so don't worry about it. If you're all fingers and thumbs and you drop it or the bow pops out, don't worry about it. It happens to all of us to start with. And you can take these outer ones and just strip those down if you want, pulling them to make them into a curly bit. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is quite a big bow. You can make it thinner if you pull it thinner in the first place. Can't really see on that handle, I've buried it in the flowers. I'll take this one to show you. Right, so you pop it onto your handle like that, bring it round, and tie it on. If you've got a glue gun, because you've bought the kit, or you've got a glue gun because you've been doing flowers before, then obviously you can just glue this straight onto your handle. It's much easier than trying to tie it. Don't forget that if you're using a hot glue gun, that it'll melt this type of ribbon because it's polyester and not proper satin ribbon. If you put on too much glue, it goes into a big blob. And if you want to, you could tie another one on, which you can strip down and make a trail from, like that. Straighten it out, and there we have a bow, whoops, on your basket handle. You can put it wherever you like, at the bottom, at the top, or wherever, but it makes a professional look for a basket that you can do yourself now. But as long as you practice, because you'll be, as I said, you'll be all fingers and thumbs, and don't worry about it because it takes us ages to get the hang of things anyway. This is the arrangement that we did at the beginning, at the first one. So, and I remember saying to you then, if you take it to the church and you can put it up on one of the church vases as a already done arrangement, say if you're sitting in the church doing them. And this was the idea, that you use an ordinary vase and just put your arrangement on the top. If you can trail down a bit more out of here, then obviously it makes it more pedestal-like. But if I take it off, you'll see that it's just an ordinary vase, okay? Like that. The other alternative to this type of vase is this. Because it's so deep, you can of course just push your flowers straight into it like that and make just an arrangement like that. But if you want to, if you take some polythene, or this happens to be that stuff that you can pop the things on, which the parcels come wrapped up in, you push it in here like that. It obviously shortens the height of the vase. The old-fashioned thing we used to use is chicken netting. I mean, if you've got any chicken wire, then that can go in a group at the top. But we don't always have that nowadays. You put your water into your vase, which helps to keep it down. And I'm not tying anything on this, so the branches will in fact just fall as they will. Now, in the garden at the moment, the raspberry canes are coming up really well, and they're a bit tall. So what I've done is I've taken the top of the raspberry cane off so that it will eventually be a height that I can reach later on in the summertime. All these things are quite useful to us. People don't think of cutting like raspberry canes or black currant or red currant before the actual berries are on them, but they last very well in water. Right, so you push those into there, into your polythene bit at the bottom. It's a shorter bit. Don't forget to take off any bits that are going to be below the water line, because that will make the water go smelly and the flowers won't last. And also don't forget to cut each thing as you put them in, so that it opens up the way for the water to go in. Whoops, this is the bit of wax flower, or your prunus or almond blossom, or whatever other kind of blossom you have. Cherry's quite nice as well. And there's a nice wild cherry, a white one, and if you can pick it early, it's very pretty. Some of my poor windswept forsythia. You can hear it's pushing into the foam down the bottom there. Now, because I haven't any oasis in the vase, I obviously can't trail down because the things will fall straight out. So this is literally a case of pushing the things into the top of the vase like that. This is a piece of cherry that hasn't come out yet, but it will come out once it's in the water and in your warm. And some irises. Now I suggest you do this arrangement on site, because once you pick it up and move it, the things are going to move into a different position, which is a bit annoying then, if you spent ages trying to get the things balanced. Whoops, it's the same height. Try not to get the things the same height as one next to it if you can avoid it. Some bits of palm or pussy willow. The branches actually help each other to stay in place, so you get like a lattice work of branches in here, and then you can fit your flowers in between them then. That's got a nice bend on it naturally, so with a bit of luck that'll push out the side. So if you try to use your flowers and foliage and branches as they droop, and try not to persuade them that they ought to go in a different direction, which they won't do because they'll keep twisting round. It shouldn't be too difficult. I've got a bit of a gap at the back here, so oops, it's got a broken top. How about a bit of Leylandii to fill it in, otherwise it gets a bit see-through. Wedge that in at the back. And you can put your daffodils in. Don't forget not to recut them, otherwise you'll have your sap going in again. It's tulips that dislike it the most actually, so we haven't got tulips. And I haven't wired these up because this is more like a natural pushed in flower arrangement. You don't need to wire them up for this. Because after all, this is a spring section of this tape, and we don't want to get into summer too quickly. Right. As it gets filled up, it's easier to push things in because they wedge between each other then. And you'll get just to this point and everything will fall out and you'll be ever so cross and say, oh bother, and have to start all over again. Now I've wired up these as a group, the bear grass. I'm just going to drop those in like that. If I can find a way in, it's better. Whoops. One into there like that. The bear grass looks really good when it's dried because it twists and it makes goes a nice grey colour. So if you have some bear grass from your florist, don't throw it away when you've finished with it. Hang it upside down in a warm, dry place and it'll do lovely twists and you can use it in your dried flower arrangements. And if you haven't bought our dried flower arranging, drying techniques video, then that one shows you all how to dry all these things that we've been using today from the garden and from your florist shop. It's quite useful then because all these arrangements you've been doing, you can save bits and keep them for the winter time. There we are. With a bit of luck, that won't fall out. One more little daffodil got left out here. Pop that in there. Don't forget to top up your vase with water on a regular basis, because otherwise you'll find that the top ones, because they're balanced in the top of the ledge here, will fall out of the water. Okay, lovely. I'm going to do the special celebration card, because I think it's a good fitting one to end the bit of the spring version on this tape. Now, you can buy these from your local florist, and it'd be much cheaper if you buy the card and then you put the flowers in. And this is the little dish that goes in here. Now, in order for it not to fall out, you have to put the Oasis in and put the tape on before you put it into the hole that's been provided. Now, the best way to do this is to carve it round a pattern that you've drawn from this. This is a little floristry knife, which are very sharp. They're very good for doing all sorts of things with, peeling onions, garlic, cutting up Oasis, all sorts of things. So they're well worth getting, even if you just keep them in the kitchen. So make your roundy shape to fit your dish. Will it fit? Not quite. A bit too big. It doesn't matter if it's dead round, because I'll tell you what will happen if you make it dead round. You won't be able to get the water in because it will flop straight out of the top of the dish. So I recommend that you cut a V into it like this. So that it enables you to put the water in where the gap is, otherwise you're really stuck. Actually, that's a very nice tight fit, so I don't really think I need any of the pot tape, but I'll put a bit on just in case. It would help if I had my scissors. Make sure it goes all the way around, because once you have your Oasis in, this tends to get a bit damp and then the tape won't stick properly. Put that over here. Whoops. Right. Decide which is going to be your front and put your little dish towards the back side. Now, being all three-sided, it's obviously going to be seen from all three sides, but at least you know which side you've got your watering bit in. Right, the idea being, because it's open at the top as well, you can put your flowers in from the top down, like that. So that's your centre point. So you can put it in between, through the little windows really. Get your foliage in first. Now you can make each window different if you actually wanted to. Oh, tummy's rumbling. Sorry about that. There we go. Put it in through there. So that makes that side with that one. And then this side, I'm going to use some Euronymous. Now this is a rockery type plant, which can get quite high if you let it grow, or it will trail over quite nicely, and you get it in the white variegated or the yellow variegated. But it's well worth putting in if you're going to be doing flower arranging, because it's quite a good quick grower and you can cut it down each year for use in your flower arrangements. If you haven't got this, then maybe you could get a pot of variegated ivy from your greengrocer or from your florist and plant that out in the garden. Let it naturalise, otherwise it's will be a bit, it gets a lot of windswept until it gets down to its normal size, natural size. And then you can keep cutting that then for your fronds of ivy. A little bit of palm, because we've just had Easter here, and the palm is lovely. A bit of pink on this side. Turn it round. Pop this in here. It smells lovely with the aromatic smells coming from the wax flower. You don't need an awful lot of bits really to fill these cards up. In fact, you don't want too much, otherwise you find there's not enough water in your little tiny bit of Oasis in the middle. Freesias smell lovely, and if you're going to give this as a gift, then there's nothing nicer than having your lovely freesia smell. Now the shorter the flowers are, the longer they'll last anyway, so don't be worried about cutting the stems right off, because they'll last a lot longer than if they're left on a long stem. Oops. Cutting down the Singapore orchid, and again I'm using the bits between each joint to cut down so that I can use the one stem, and I've cut it down to 3 pieces so that it's not wasted. So that's one side, a little bit more to fill in there. What shall I use? A little bit more of the Singapore orchid. I think they're lovely. They've got really cheerful faces on them. They're a bit like a oriental pansy. And of course they trail nicely. Fill that up in there. That's that side. So I've got 3 freesias and 2 stems of orchids there. That's got a bit of a thick stem there, so I'm not going to use that one, otherwise it'll push all the oasis out. This is the lilac. Pop that in between my bit of palm, find a little hole for it. Nice bit of cream foliage for there. Whoops. As long as you hide your dish, then it's not too bad. I think I'll cut the top off that one. That one's got a bit of a mark on, so I can push this in. This will be a good arrangement for your bits of lilac that have gone a bit droopy. And I have this space on this side, and I'm just going to pop in a couple of pink tulips, having not brought them to the table. I'm going to wire these up because they will go off on their own tack otherwise. Oops. Now I'm just going to push the wire into the head and twist it around the stem a couple of times. Now that will stop the tulip from going off on too much of a hike. Cut this one a bit shorter. And this one is so short it won't matter because it has no stem for it to go off on. A little bit more of the wax flower up here around this leaf bit. There's a nice thin piece to pop up in the middle. Right, if you wanted to, on your yellow side, you could twist a piece of leaf and then just catch it over the top of one of the flowers and have it dangling down. Or if you've got your glue gun, you could just glue it to it if you wanted to. There you go. It's a 3-sided birthday card if you want it for a birthday, or a nice table centre, or whatever, or let's put this bit of, or for whatever special occasion you have. Maybe it's a silver wedding or a ruby wedding, or somebody's actually getting married, and this would look nice on their table. Well, now the spring section is finished and we're into the summer side now. Thank goodness the sun's out and we've had a marvellous start to the summer this year. It's mid-July and we've been out and we bought some flowers from the wholesaler, so it's current with what will be around this time of year. We've also got a few bits from the garden to show you, because I'm sure most people have got things in the garden they can use as well. I'm going to start off this section with a fairly large arrangement, mainly because we have these absolutely fantastically ginormous delphiniums. Now, delphiniums come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. This is a most beautiful dark purpley colour. You can get them from pinks now right through to the very pale blues. Unfortunately, this is a very heavy type, and I couldn't get any of the very thinner types, the paler ones, so I'm going to have to do a fairly large arrangement. A word about delphiniums: they're the same family as the larkspur, which is slightly thinner, which is quite useful for drying. These big ones will dry, but you'll have to dry them separately because they shrivel up quite dramatically. They also have a hollow stem, and the bigger the delphinium is, the bigger the stem is actually going to be. And it's suggested that you pour water from a jug down into this hollow stem and plug it with just a little bit of cotton wool. That will keep the water in the stem, which the actual flower will need to keep going. It doesn't draw up very well from an oasis block. It does best in just a jar of water. So that's the suggestion for the hollow stems of the delphinium. In front of me here I've got an old-fashioned bread mixing bowl. It's slightly tapered, but it's very big. It would hold a lot of water, and it's also heavy enough to keep the big delphiniums from falling over. I've also got a Begonia rex plant. I've been growing this for several years, and sometimes it's produced leaves and sometimes it hasn't, but I rather like the leaf, and rather than cutting it, I'm going to use it a bit like a potter fleur. I'm just resting it in the bowl because I don't want it to get wet from the water from the oasis, because it would be too damp otherwise, and I'm going to do the arrangement round it. But the leaves are so beautiful with the big silvery patterns that it's well worth trying to think of using maybe a pot plant in with your arrangements. I'm going to bring it through. The design is going to come through. This is a ring of silver birch bark that has been stripped and pinned to a dry oasis ring, or a dry foam ring. It's quite simple to do, but don't take it all off one tree. If you've got somebody that's in a woodland that's cutting down the silver birch, then they're the people that you want to ask if you can have the thin bark strips from. I'll put a dish in here with a lump of foam in, so that I'm going to bring the arrangement from up the top, down through the centre and out over the ring. Well, hopefully that's the general idea. Right, because these are so big, I'm just going to have to use these at the back. So they are quite large, so you might disappear from view for a while with these. Cut these off. It's got some very good side shoots, so we'll have those in for a later date. The only thing with delphiniums in the gardens is that they do attract the slugs violently, and you have to always be on the watch out for that. But for church flower arranging or for doing big pedestals, they're a terrific boon, and they're well worth planting. Mind you, they're not too expensive in the florist, so if you haven't got a garden, then I'm sure your florists at this time of year will have these in. These have got themselves totally tangled up. The trouble is that they've got hooky bits on the backs of the flowers that hook themselves onto each other. If I break one, it's going to make a big gap in the stem. That's it. Wow, this is a nice big one. Bury the scissors now. Right. Now that I've told you about putting the water up, I'm not actually going to do it for the purposes of the video, but it might be a good idea if you think about doing that. I'm also shaving off the knobbly bits so I don't make too big a hole when I push it in. See how big that one is in comparison to this. It's going to come a bit shorter. The leaves are very good, so if you've got a good leaf, don't throw it away, because you can use that as your centre point later on. Get the good side. Flowers will always have a good and a bad side, so you want to twist them round to make sure that you get the best side for them. It's their photogenic side, really. Right. The Oasis I've put on the slant in here, it's a full block, so I can use all the depth going down into the bowl. The larkspurs, very pretty. Bring this out on this side. Get rid of some of this foliage because I don't want all of that. Take that. I have the nice bud over here. Right. The larkspur. Sweet peas are my favourite flowers for summer. And if you buy the flower arranging from your garden tape, you'll find that I've used sweet peas in there as well because they are my favourite flowers. And they grow in the garden, or you can get them from the florist, so it works both ways with that as well. As do foxgloves. A lot of people think of them as a weed, but I think they're wonderful. And they come up such beautiful colours. You start off with a pink one, and the patch ends up with some white in it as well, which goodness knows where they come from, but this one is a white one, and it's materialised from I don't know where, because I haven't got any white ones before. They were from the garden, as is some catmint. A lot of people have fairly large shrubberies, and the catmint is a good one for planting at the front or the borders to make like a small hedge. It has got a rather nasty smell though, so you have to be a bit careful where you're going to put it if you use it as an arrangement. There's a frond of bracken. Well, not bracken in actual fact, it's a fern, because bracken doesn't last very well, so don't be tempted to pick the bracken. That is the one with the 4 or 5 prongs on it. You want the ones with just the one stem. These are peony leaves. Such a big arrangement, I can't get through it now. These are peony leaves. When the peonies are finished, don't just chop the plant down and leave it. These are the sweet peony leaves, so they're not as big as the big red ones that you get sometimes. But they're absolutely really very good for using as centre points. We have some stocks. Stocks at this time of year are good, and you'll find them in the florist no problem at all. Personally, I dislike the smell of them, and they make the water really grotty. If you've got a jar and you haven't taken off when you put them in a bucket and you haven't taken off these leaves, then the water turns very cabbagey because it's a member of that family. So it does tend to have a bad smell in buckets. Never mind. We'll put these in here at the front. I don't find stock lasts that well. I mean, they last 2 or 3 days, but they're not a good weekly plant. I find that they go off at the bottom. Packing it makes a lot of trouble for them because they don't like being squashed, and obviously when the growers pack them, they have to put them into plastic bags or into boxes, and they sweat, and then they don't travel very well. These are campanula. These tend to come in from Holland, or you could grow these in the garden. They have a very good lasting quality. Whoops, bent that. That's clever, because I can't reach over for that side. Put it in there. Where is the block? I've lost it. That's it. Of all the campanulas, these are as good as any of them, but they're multi-headed, so you do have to take off the odd flower as they die off. Just a few sweet peas. The thing with summer flower arranging is that you get wonderful shades of purples and pinks, and you can make some really good arrangements with these colours. If you try and keep to tones of a colour, as I've said before, it does help the arrangement. If I suddenly stuck yellow in here, it would look a bit funny and it would take your eye away from all the other colours, you know, the pinky and the mauve colours that are trying to be dominant. Right. Quite see around there. It's getting rather huge on this side. Let's have a look. Just fill in this side. I'm going to bring this bud out here before I lose it, because it's part of the ones that I've used in this top bit. Right, there's a delphinium head left here. What have I got sticking out on this side? Anything or nothing? Just putting a bit of ruscus in here just to fill in this gap a bit. Then I've got the ruscus to bring through at the front here. Gypsophila you can grow in the gardens this time of year, and it's coming locally in from the Channel Islands at the moment, so it's not very soft as it tends to be from sometimes when you get it in from Israel or from Holland. It tends to be a bit limp. That's that side. Right, now at the front I've got a bit of broken larkspur, so I'm going to cut it off there and just bring a few pieces through at the front. I don't want to hide the ring too much because it's such a beautiful silvery colour. I really want some wide leaves, which could be a problem. What have I got? Oh, I cut a piece of the fern down here, cutting it in between the joints, so I get quite a few little bits from the one stem. If you've used this type of fern, then you might find that you have to spray it quite well. It doesn't like a lot of hot sunlight on it, it soon shrivels up. Alchmelia mollis is wonderful. It's like a substitute for Gypsophila, but it's this soft greeny colour. Again, it's one of the plants you could grow in the garden in a shady spot, or no problem getting it from good florists at this time of year. In fact, they like it for their flower arrangements because it gives a different dimension, and you can use the leaves as well on here. Cut down the sweet peas. Now I've got this delphinium is a bit too chunky for here, so I'm going to take off just the flower stems themselves. They are quite long. The ones at the bottom are always the longest, and these will go actually quite well as a single stem into the arrangement. Just hanging that into there so it links up underneath there. Don't be worried about cutting these off, because they will in actual fact last a lot longer if they're cut off than if they're just left on the stem, because they haven't had to battle to get the water up. So they will last longer than possibly the long stem will. We use them a lot in wedding bouquets, not as big as this. If they come as big as this, we have a problem. But we like to use them in bouquets because they're a good colour. It's one of the few things that we can get that's a bluey shade or a mauvey shade to try and match up with the bridesmaids as a rule. Goodness me, a couple of more sweet peas, and that I don't want to put too much in, otherwise I'm going to lose the ring from there. The different shades of chrysanthemum are useful. This is a bijou, and it's very sweet little chrysanth. They all come all the year round now, but I like this one to mix in with the summer flowers because it's not quite so heavy as some of the different types. Right. I think I'll just lower this a bit because it's a bit sticking out, I think. That's better. Otherwise it's sticking out too much. If there's any gaps that side, you'll have to forgive me, but I can't battle with the plant and the bits to hide it. There we go. That's to give you an idea of how you can use the low things with the high, and you don't really need too much stuff to go in here. It's only 3 stems of delphinium really, and a couple of foxgloves and a bunch of larkspur possibly, with a nice plant in the middle and a little bit for the outside. So although it looks quite a meaty arrangement, it hasn't actually cost an awful lot. For a change, I'm going to do an all-round arrangement, but making it in a fairly modern style. Rather than being loose and sort of flowing, this one will come in groups of colours. These are some really fantastic leaves I found in the garden. I think it's fuchsia leaves, but I'm not quite sure. They have a kind of plume that comes out, but I've never seen this dark colour before, but the leaves are wonderful. So I've nicked these from the garden. I'm going to make a group like that. The dish is this sort of plastic, but it's this nice pink colour, so it will go with just about anything. In the middle, I'm going to put the tall, thin things right up high, like that, because I want the height building up. Oh dear, that's got a broken one. Let's see if I can find an unbroken one at the top. Try this one. It's better. Continental flower arranging does tend to, at the moment, have these very dramatic lines where you have groups together. It's not something that I've ever been brought up with, so I find it slightly more difficult to do than people that are going through colleges nowadays, because they are taught these things as they go along. We have a group like that in the middle. At the front, I'm going to put in next to the dark, I'm going to have the light, which is the silver. We always call these lamb's tails. I'm not exactly sure the proper name, but they're quite current plants at the moment in the garden. They have these big furry leaves, and these are the flower stems. I have 3 of those. Next to this, I'm putting some hebe. Hebes are useful shrubs, as we'd said earlier. They're just coming into flower now. This is the white variety, and you can get pinks and blues, and you've got the greenery most of the year as well, so that's handy. Right, through the hebe I'm going to put the trailing rose. Now you can buy roses from your florist, and you can ask for the spray roses. They won't be this very small one as a rule, they'll be the commercial spray rose, but this is one that came from the garden. It has a lovely perfume and it's quite like a rambling rose, so it covers a good lot of area. Just going to make a group of that coming to the base here. Put this at the back. So I've got one group, I'm grouping them as I go round. What else have we got? We've got the mock orange. Now this one has quite a few leaves on. You can take them off if you want to. This shrub has a lovely smell, but don't do what my mother's gardener does. That is, he cuts it back every summer and then she wonders why she doesn't get any flowers, because it only flowers on its old growth. So it has to have made the growth during the previous summer for it to flower on it the following year. So of course she's got all her new growth all the time, which doesn't have any flower stems on it. Has a lovely smell. It also has a tendency to shed fairly well, so try not to cut it when it's in too full of flower, because it will shed fairly quickly. Take that out. I'm just going to put into the middle, so it doesn't look quite so stark in the middle, some Alstroemeria. This time of year outside you'll have the orangey varieties, orange and yellow. They're the ones that are the naturalised ones for the gardens. You have to buy the proper seed for these type, the ones with all the colours on them. Otherwise it's a commercial one that you tend to get from your florist. But at this time of year they are quite good. And they have some good stiff heads on them. Sometimes when they've been in the winter time, they are a bit limp. They come in all sorts of colours as well now. You've got the yellows and the whites. But the wild ones, as I said, are the orangey coloured and the yellow. Making a line with some fern now. If you've got any moss, you could use moss as a different shade, type of base work if you wanted to, because that would make a good different eye level really. Coming from that, I've got the pink on this side and I've got the white. So I've got the red, the white and the pink on this side. So on this, coming through this bit of green next to this pink, I'm going to put some Rhodanthe. It's the everlasting flower that you can grow quite easily in the garden. And if you're interested in learning how to dry this and anything else about dried flowers, then the tape about dried flowers, drying techniques and arranging might be quite good for you. You want to pick this when the sun's out on it, because it's fully open then and the flowers are already half dried because they're the papery feel to them anyway. Right, so that's the line that balances the pinks on this side. Right, next way round. It's a bit difficult because I'm running out of space here. I've got some of the variegated mint, just to put a bit of colour into the fern on this side. I've also got a few grasses. I love grasses, and this time of year, early June, middle June and July, you have the grasses all flowering beautifully. This is the variegated grass, which is the one that you would grow in the garden. It's one of these things that you do want to watch if you don't want it spreading everywhere. But it is handy for flower arranging, and it's the new growth that's the best bit of it, because it's the ones with the most variegated bits in. So if you cut it down before it gets too gangly, then you'll keep your nice variegated foliage. Where are my long grasses? I seem to have lost them. Oh, here's one. Because this is facing a lot towards this way, I want to bring something around this side for whoever is going to sit on this side of the arrangement. But I seem to have buried the plumes of grasses somewhere. Can't see them offhand. Oh, there's another one. In the spring, we use the leaves of the sorrel in our salads. Now it's gone to seed and the leaves have got a bit old. We've got the seed pods of the sorrel, which is much finer than its other mate, the dock. You can dry these, but you have to be careful that they don't shed and manage to seed themselves even further into the garden, because they are a bit of a pest. Once you've got dock, you've got a hell of a job to get rid of it. So that's the dock and that's the sorrel. Coming through this last section, I'm going to put my favourite sweet peas. There are so many beautiful varieties of sweet peas nowadays. I'm not sure if you've been to Chelsea Flower Show and you've seen the absolutely wonderful displays of sweet peas there. You'd be really envious of how people manage to get them to grow so big. These ones I ordered and came into the market this morning, which I went down and picked up. We've had a lot of rain recently, and they reckon this will be the last of the sweet peas for a while until they've grown on, unfortunately. So it's a shame really, because the weddings bouquets look really good with the sweet peas in them. And it's going to be a wonderfully smelly arrangement. These are little pinks, the old-fashioned pinks, which have that lovely clovey smell. The more you pick, the more you get. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4. And one to trail out over the front. Now we've done the things in groups of colour and groups of type. So if I clear this off here, I think I'm just going to put this one coming round this side, so they're not all facing the same way, otherwise it's better. I can turn it round now. You'll see the different types of flowers and foliage. So you get a different dimension on each section. There we go. Just gives you an idea of how to do a grouping arrangement. Summer is a time for weddings. Unfortunately, this happens to be a red base that could do summer or it could do Christmassy time. But this is quite an unusual idea for the centre of a table rather than just having balloons or just having a simple table arrangement. It's done the same as a table arrangement, but of course you haven't got the height for the middle here. So all it needs is to be taken as you would do your saucer, around the edge, as we did before, with whatever foliage you have. Don't make it too big, otherwise it will be too big for the actual container. Also, we've got fairly large things like sweet peas to get into this small base. We've picked some geranium heads because you could get these from your florist or from your garden. A lot of people don't pick geraniums. I don't know why, because they last really well in water and they have these beautiful colours. This one being red obviously suits this container, and the leaves are very good as well. So use the leaves as your focal point. Shake off any heads, because the geranium is one of these plants that have buds at the back with the new flowers going over in the middle as the new ones come out, the old flowers going over as the new ones come out. So you have to shake them off a bit to get rid of the old flower stems. That's it. Put this one in the centre underneath here. Then we have some roses, which I'm just going to take the outer petals from because they're marked. Summer's the time for your garden roses. The red roses don't alter a lot in costing from your florist shop, unfortunately, because somebody still has to grow them, and they have to be grown to special sizes. The length of the stem and the size of the head are all measured, and they have to be graded. So that doesn't make a lot of difference on the price on a yearly basis. Mustn't forget my lovely sweet peas. To trail out. I was going to put the burgundy one in, but I think it's not going to be the right colour. Whoops. We have some members of the Campion family here, but it's red and not the pink or the white as the wild one is. If you've got a herb garden and you don't want your parsley to go to seed, or you have the roadside filled with your cow parsley or your dill, then they're good things to cut to make a delicate one with your Camellia mollis as well. Let's put my sweet pea in at the back here. You don't get very many red weddings in the summertime, but this would do for an evening arrangement when you've got guests coming, or for a barbecue where you want your fiery bit for your guests, for your barbecued meats, etc. All it remains to do then is to light the light and wait till dusk falls. You can get some really cute containers now in the ceramic. This is a beautiful little toady type frog, and I've used the lid from one of the boxes to put him on, so it's like on a plinth. It's good because you can get quite a drop of water into here, or you could use it as a plant container if you want to. This is Ming fern. It's a bit prickly, and you get it from your florist or from your wholesaler, but it's brilliant for making a furry look, and it's very good for covering as well. It lasts quite a long time, and you get a lot from just one stem. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Underneath here, you want to make sure that the oasis or the foam is not over the edge of your container. The reason is that the osmosis effect, as the water draws up, it will drip over the edge. So when you put it in, you want to make sure you've just carved it so that there isn't an overhang here. The small chrysanths. Now, you wouldn't believe it, but the actual family Dianthus covers from Sweet William through to the pinks, etc. So these are related to those, although they don't actually look as though they are. Sweet William come in for quite a long period into the shops, and also they have a good flowering season in the garden. They're biannuals, so you have to wait a year before they actually flower the following year. But once you've got your seed in and growing, then obviously every year you'll get a good show. The smell is wonderful as well. The pinks are good because they come with all their buds, and unlike the spray carnations, they actually do have a reasonably good smell as a rule. You can send off for these usually from catalogues, and you get a good variety then of different colours, which are quite useful then for flower arranging later on in a couple of years' time when they've grown. The bush spirea is very good as well. This is the one with the yellow leaves, but it gives you a different tone, so I'm not so worried about the leaves. I just want the pinky bit at the end here. The sweet peas and the Ming fern look really nice together, I think. And I'm just going to cut this sweet pea down so I've got 2 sections. A little bit of gypsophila to lighten it up. This is very backward at the moment, so it's going to take a while to come out. Now that it's summer, these come in from the local growers as well as Guernsey and Jersey, so it's not quite as far forward as some of the ones we get in the rest of the year, but it's much stiffer stems, so it's easier to put in. And marguerites, they're well worth buying from your florist or from your garden centre and putting in the garden. The more you cut, the more you get. Or you could look out in the verges, because quite often you'll see the wild relative, the dog daisy, there as well, and they make very good cut flowers. These are little parsley pips where it's gone to seed, but it gives a different colour dimension to it. I think this container's rather cute, and it's very easy to do. Little miniature gladioli, we call them bridal gladioli because they're used in wedding bouquets a lot. They come in the white and then this sort of peachy pink, and also one that has a pink with a darker fleck in it as well, which is quite a nice one for your wedding bouquets. Don't forget, if you fancy having a go and learning how to wire up and you've enjoyed this video, then why don't you try one of the other ones, such as flowers for your wedding. We've even done one now which is flowers for funerals. Might sound a sad subject, but it's quite an interesting one, and it would be quite a good thing if you could do something yourself for somebody that you loved or that you knew, because it's something personal that way, and it's much more appreciated if you've actually tried to do something yourself. There we are. That's the frog. And I hope you haven't found everything too difficult and that you enjoy trying your own different arranging, and that you'll come back and try one of the other videos with us. Thank you.